What do we want? When do we want it?
Now.
What do we want?
Climate justice.
When do we want it?
Now.
Ashe. Ashe. Hello, my name is Denise Abdul Rahman, and I'm going to serve as your moderator. I am with the Chisholm Legacy Project, the great founder, Jacqueline Patterson. It's through her vision and Pan-African Climate Justice Alliance that we formed the Global Afro-Descendant Climate Justice Collaborative. And we have been working together, well, Pakcha and Jackie have been working together for years. The collaborative has started forming this year. Our vision right now, we have 41 countries represented, and we have about 170 persons and organizations that have attended. And so our vision is 50 representative countries and 200 attendees or more. So with that said, we want to start this wonderful global discussion on how this systemic racism is impacting us all over the African diaspora. So I'd first like to ask the panelists to share your name and your organization, and then we'll start with the first question of why do you think it is important to explicitly include race and racism in the UNFCCC?
Hi, my name is Susan Otieno from ActionAid, and a close collaborator and a partner with the PACJA. Just to go straight to the question. When you talk climate and you talk of the impact of climate change, you'll definitely see it on people with color. And you directly see it with Africans, unfortunately, when you talk of the impact. And that's where the importance of talking about racism as we talk about climate starts its journey. When you talk about the people who are impacted, you narrow down to the women, you'll find the African women. Hence, it's important in a nutshell.
Thank you. Yes, let's give her a round of applause. Thank you so much.
I will speak in French. My name is Didier Molichot, membre du Parlement panafricain, président de la Commission économie rurale, agriculture, ressources naturelles et environnement. Le Parlement panafricain voulait inscrire dans l'action de cette COP la justice climatique. Nous sommes partenaires des PACJA depuis beaucoup d'années et nous pensons que le moment de l'action est arrivé. Et nous pensons que le moment de l'action parlementaire est arrivé parce que c'est les parlementaires qui représentent le peuple et c'est le peuple qui souffre. Le peuple africain souffre du changement climatique alors qu'il pollue moins. C'est tout l'intérêt de notre participation ici.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you. I don't know whether you have gathered what he was saying. Perhaps do we have one who can translate for the purposes of audience? One of our colleagues, Agustin?
He's Honorable Mauricio from the Pan-African Parliament. The Pan-African Parliament has been collaborating with PACJA for a long time. And since they are the representatives of the people that are the front line of climate impact, he thinks this initiative is quite welcome. And they want to inscribe or register their support for this initiative. That's all he has said.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So let me greet you with the greetings of solidarity on the climate justice movement. What do you want? When do you want it?
Wow.
When you want. Thank you very much. Let me start by celebrating my icon, Robert Bulland. When we started this notion on climate justice, we were digging into books and books and books. And the only initial definition on climate justice, I only found it from one U.S. individual, one person of color, and here he is. I'm very privileged to meet him here today. Let us appreciate this gentleman, ladies and gentlemen. I also celebrate my colleague, and we have been in the trenches for a long time, Jackie Patterson and the entire team of her foundation and the NAACP, Kate, and those others who have worked in all this movement for a long time. We are very delighted today to be part of this collaborative. If you talk about racism, if you talk about discrimination, if you talk about exclusion, it is, we have the manifestation of that exclusion, and racism is one of the cancers we want to clear out of these negotiations. I have been part of it. I have attended the past 10 COPs. And if I can tell you, racism manifests itself in these COPs, and we need to talk about it. We need to be loud about it. We have seen all sectors and thematic areas being carried out and having saying that we do not have voice. But what about Afro-descendants, people of African descent? And so as we mark this journey, with the first time having a pavilion, having a space where the African people, where the people of color can say, come and they say, yes, this is where I belong. This is kudos, the team which came up with this. And as the African people, we are going to be in solidarity. But this is not just talking about it. It is the issue of power relations. Do we have power? Yesterday, we were setting the agenda for the UN to proceed the next 2 weeks. Africa was brought here united by one thing: special needs and circumstances for the African people. That is what carries our hope, our aspirations, our demands. It was dropped at the agenda stage because we do not have power. I was asking myself whether if it is EU which was carrying that agenda, it could have been dropped. If it was the United States with its power which was carrying that agenda, couldn't be dropped. And those other, it is the issue of power, and that is manifested through racism, which we are going to fight here from now henceforth. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
Now. Climate justice. Now.
Thank you. And let me say, people, we have the power, and we must use the power within us to force these discussions, because most times people don't want to discuss racism, and they don't want to discuss climate colonialism. But we have to be the voice. We have to bring this up. And we do have environmental injustice. We do have climate colonialism built within the framework of the UNFCCC process, and we must be prepared. We must have the courage to call it out when we see it. It's very important that we do this. It's not about just policy making, but we have to center people in policies. And for far too long, we have had negotiations that did not center people, or they would say things, they would talk about a just transition, but when it came down to actually implementing those talks, we did not see them being implemented in the policy process. And so we have to be vigilant. We have to demand that people are centered in these policies within the UNFCCC process.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And so our next question is, when we know all these systems have been put against us and have caused so much travesty in all of our collective communities, what do you think about climate reparations and loss and damage?
I'll come next. Thank you. I wanted to pass it over to Dr. Mithika.
What do you think about climate reparations in the context of loss and damage?
Thank you. Reparations. The whole question of climate change is that someone somewhere has caused the crisis we are in. And just think about a child you have broken an egg for this child. You have to replace it. And so, reparations, and this is what the North does not want to hear. They don't want to listen to that because it translates in trillions. It is like actually slavery. It is like slavery, economic slavery, that now you have caused the problem. You have pumped the greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. You have killed our future, the future of our children, future generations. And now we demand that you have a responsibility really to compensate. Reparation is about compensation. You compensate. But that, when it is now, we were fighting for it on climate deaths initially. Then they went through the corners. Then it is back through the loss and damage. Loss and damage is that you are the cause. Right now, where I come from, in the Horn of Africa, that 8 million people are facing starvation. Some of them are dying. Millions and millions of livestock are already dying. Wild animals. There is no tourism again. There are no animals to see. Wildlife. And so the point here is that we see loss and damage as very critical because it is going to cover and compensate. But they don't want to listen to that. And so, now they have been cutting corners. Yesterday, the UK said they are not going to pay to support loss and damage because they are fearing us to ask them to pay trillions and trillions of dollars, which are supposed to be delivered through this reparation. And so, it is upon us. Let us generate that critical mass. Africa itself constitutes of more than almost 1 billion people. We have also the diaspora, the people of color. I think the only answer we have and the only voice we have is to strengthen our voices. And once we have that critical mass, what the numbers can do. So we are not going to slow down. We are not going to give up. I think what we have experienced here is a short setback. This is temporary. We are going to win, and we are going to win ultimately. What I will finish by is saying that when those who have caused the problem think that they are helping Africa, this is not charity. The problem of climate crisis is going to affect everybody. I normally give that example of that titanium, which you start thinking, the strong ones who are able to jump very, very quickly at the top of the titanium, but eventually all of it sank. It is very few people who survived. And so we want to caution that this is titanium, which is going to sink everybody. It is just a matter of time. Look at what is happening in Europe. Drought which has never been seen. rivers drying up. So they were thinking, and China and those are elsewhere, they were thinking that this is the problem of Africa. Now it is at the doorstep. Let us work. We need really to address climate change on equality, on the basis of justice, because those are imperatives of climate justice. Those who have caused the problem should address it. Thank you.
Ashe. Ashe.
Thank you. Loss and damage or reparations is actually, it's being made more complicated. It's a very simple complex that you break, you fix. And a lot of times countries have done everything. As a matter of fact, they didn't allow loss and damage, wasn't even on the agenda at the SB in Germany. So we were able to get it on the agenda at COP27, but we have to hold the countries who have contributed most to the disruption of our climate, we have to hold them accountable, because those who have contributed least are the ones who are being most impacted. And all we're asking is to make right on your promises, make right, take up your responsibility. And a lot of people are afraid. They don't want to hear restitution or reparations. And when we talk about finance, we know promises have been made, but those promises have not been kept. Developing nations, countries who are being impacted most, countries who are being impacted by flooding. But it isn't just the global south, it is also the Gulf South, which are being adversely impacted. And it's very important that we look at this picture holistically, and we have to make whole. We have to take responsibility for the loss and damage we've caused, that the developed countries have caused to struggling communities.
Ashe.
In French. Pour nous, la survenue de Covid-19 devait nous servir d'exemple. Parce que le changement climatique affecte plus les pays africains maintenant, mais we can. You want translate? Yeah. Okay. Les paiements des dommages causés par le changement climatique.
It's not working.
Yeah.
Okay. Can you hear me? Okay, it says COVID-19 should have served us a great lesson.
Oui, le Covid-19 doit nous servir de leçons parce que le changement climatique affecte le monde entier. Et les pays africains sont le plus affectés. Mais nous savons que ce ne sont pas les pays africains qui sont responsables en grande partie de ces changements climatiques. Ils contribuent très faiblement au changement climatique. Mais les autres nations qui polluent plus devraient payer plus parce que, comme le Covid, on a vu ce que le Covid a fait. Le Covid n'a ménagé personne. Le Covid a affecté tout le monde. Et l'impact du changement climatique sera plus dramatique partout au monde.
Just as COVID-19 that we say should have saved us a lesson, climate change, yeah, but hello? Yeah, Honorable was saying COVID-19 should have served us a great lesson because it impacted everyone, whether the global north or the global south. It is true that Africa was heavily impacted. Climate change is impacting everywhere, but Africa is suffering the consequence of climate change, and they have not caused the problem. So, the issue of reparations is just but fair that we should talk about it and take that into consideration.
Et au niveau du Parlement panafricain, notre conviction, c'est que c'est maintenant ou jamais que l'action parlementaire doit se faire. Et l'action parlementaire doit se faire en deux directions. Il y a l'engagement des parlementaires à domestiquer dans leur pays respectif toutes les lois nécessaires, contrôler l'action de l'exécutif, mais il y a aussi le volet de la diplomatie parlementaire.
So at the Pan-African Parliament, we are convinced. Okay. I'm being told to stand here. So at the Pan-African Parliament, we are very convinced that climate action is now or never. And that climate action by parliamentarians is in two directions. The one direction is control of government action on the ground. And again, the second part is that we have to domesticate the laws to facilitate climate action on the ground.
Mais le deuxième volet, c'est la diplomatie parlementaire. Et cette diplomatie parlementaire s'est faite avec les autres parlementaires des pays du Nord.
The second part, therefore, is the parliamentary diplomacy. Parliamentary diplomacy takes place relationship between African parliamentarians and parliamentarians in the global North.
C'est de convaincre le parlementaire des autres pays à influencer leurs exécutifs à financer les interventions pour réparer les dommages. Merci.
And exactly, it means that the Southern parliamentarians or African parliamentarians have to convince their northern peers to put pressure on the northern executive to finance climate action in the global south. Thank you.
Thank you so much. If I can contribute, we need to look at it from the cause, and what is so saddening is that the climate injustices are more of a behavioral result. It's what you do and what it causes. What you do, the result that it causes. And therefore, you're able to direct it to the person who did the damage. And we do not see the North running away from this blame. That cannot happen. And that's why it brings it back to us as people in the South to really redirect the loss and damage conversation to where it ought to start from. You messed it up, as my counterpart has said, you pay up. And if you're paying up, is it that you're choosing what to pay up for? I don't think you have a choice. You have to compensate the damage that you've caused. And if there's need to know the damage that has been caused by climate justice, just look at the weather patterns, the disaster that we are seeing. If it's not drought, tomorrow it's floods. That's enough to tell you the impact of climate injustices. And when you go deeper, then you get to see it in Africa. You go deeper, you get to see it on the black women in Africa, because they are the ones who remain with nature to tend, but also rely on nature for their survival. So as you continue damaging the climate, you will definitely see the effects on Africans. So we cannot run away from it. If the North is saying they are not ready to compensate, then we need to continue speaking about it and pulling in everyone who believes that it's now being looked at a Southern effect and let the South deal with it. That is something we shouldn't accept. We have to pull together. If you move to the alternatives that are now available, the mitigations that are available, they are not alternatives that are easily affordable for Africa, for instance, because we are burdened by debts. We are burdened, the COVID effect, much as we didn't lose as many people in Africa as it was expected, but its effects are still being felt and felt till today in Africa. So we have to come together. We have to talk about loss and damage. We have to talk about it to the right people. And I believe this is the right space. If it is not being focused on effectively on the agenda, we are here to make sure that it's focused on. Thank you.
It is our duty to fight for freedom. It is our duty to win. I'm asking all of the Black Femme to stand up in regards to today is Green Day for women and the sacrifices that women make that loss and damage will never replace. The violence, the raping, the violence, the raping, the sacrifices women make to get access to water. Ashe, it is our duty to fight for freedom. It is our duty to win. I want to point out that we have a resolution that is being passed around that's called the Racism, and Climate Reparations, the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. We have it in English, we have it in Swahili, we have it in French, we have it in Portuguese, we have it in Spanish. And we're asking you to sign off onto this resolution. We may have run out of some, so we want to be able to email you electronic copy. You can contact jpat1, email.
It's jpatters1, JPATTERS1 @gmail.com, because you don't want to have my whole long email address. So that's a short one, JPATTERS1 @gmail.com. Otherwise, we don't have any French or English left. So we have Swahili, Spanish, and Portuguese left.
You can also come up to me and sign off, put your organization and your name so that we can add you to this resolution. So just wanted to put that announcement there. And now we'll go back to our panel discussion where we would like to have two persons come up to make some commentary. One is Miss Memory Feminette and Reverend Lesmore Ezekiel. Just a memento comment. Thank you. Yes, let's give them.
Thank you so much. I just want to thank you so much for bringing this topic to the agenda. And I want to just reiterate that as African women from the continent, our issues are historical, together with the African and Afro-descendant women who all this economy that we are fighting that has caused the disaster that we face today. It's an economy that was built on the backs of African women on the continent, on African women or women of African descendants who were taken by slavery 4 years ago, 4+ years ago, who have built these economies that have caused these disasters, the economies that we are being forced to pay for in these conferences where our voices are not being heard. So it is time for us to stand together to really prioritize and to center and to make sure it's explicit, even as our leaders are talking, for us to ensure that the reparations are on the agenda. The reparations are coming to us on the continent, but also recognizing the women who are of Afro descendants in the Caribbean, in the Americas, in the Asia, and in the Europe. So we stand for that and we demand for that. It should not be in 2024. It should be now. It should be now that this agenda, we are talking 400+ years of slavery. That has never been talked about. We are talking about our land, our forest, which as African women, we still have to struggle within the patriarchal capitalist system. So now is the time for us to stand together. Now is the time to also have our brothers supporting us, our climate justice. There is no climate justice without gender justice. There's no climate justice without racial justice. Thank you.
Climate justice. What do we want? What do we want? When do we want it? When do we want it? The issues of climate justice and tying it also to the question of racial discrimination and racial injustice are matters of life and death. And it must be seen as such. It cannot be politicized. It cannot also be commercialized. Because oftentimes we have seen a situation where issues relating to racial justice or climate justice, it is often been politicized or romanticized. And when we talk about climate justice, we are looking at the issues of life and death because it affects all of us. And as religious people, we talk about we are all created in the image and likeness of God. But oftentimes we have seen that it remains as a rhetoric, not being translated into our concrete realities and actions. And so the issues that are being raised here, for us to look at racial justice in relation to climate reparation, is very critical. So it brings in the question of legacies of slavery, legacies of colonialism, that those who are responsible for that must be called to account. And those who are hypocrites must be named as hypocrites. Because oftentimes people come to the table, they pretend that this is it. But therefore, we must call the hypocrites to account. And that this reparation is not a joke. And all of us must be collective in our call. And that is why I hold dearly to the call that Dr. Mitika made. We need to form a critical mass that we will amplify our voices of justice. Do not be co-opted. Do not be co-opted. Do not be co-opted. Don't fall into the conspiracy of silence. Speak now for justice and justice for all. Thank you.
Ashe. Now we're going to turn it to Mathika. We're going to ask you a question specifically, Mathika. You've been going to the COP for the Conference of Parties for a while, and you know the ins and the outs of the process. What would be the strategy to get racism, and climate reparations into the UNFCCC negotiations? What are the key steps?
So for me, I just borrow from the strategies we used to integrate and to ensure climate justice is embedded in what we are doing now. I was quite excited, though those are baby steps, that in the preamble of the Paris Agreement, you find just a term, climate justice. When we started this discourse on climate justice and democratized this UNFCCC process, which used to be really very rigid science and environmental discourse, then no one was even bothering. In fact, some of them were regarding us as mad fellows, raising issues which are not supposed to be done at scientific discourses. But look at what is happening. Whatever we are doing here actually is out of that struggle. So that gives me strength that right now, as we now start building a foundation and saying racial justice is something which we have been silent about in the UNFCCC. Why are we talking about the rights of indigenous people? Why are we talking about the trade unions? Why did the trade unions have very good victory when we started the just transition? Because it came from the American trade union movement, because they shouted about it. Women, gender, and those others So even this, what we are starting today, let me assure you that it is going to be centrally embedded into the UNFCCC. If you don't speak, no one will speak for us. We need racial justice, the racism to be discussed here, because it is all what we experience. We are actually victims of it, even within actually the civil society, ourselves, within the African civil society. We have actually experienced it. And I talked about power relations. We don't want to go that because those are our allies, but I think really it is permeating not only into negotiations, even within our movement and civil society. We have to speak about it. Representation and our voice is about us. If you don't speak, you are not given a voice. That is the issue of procedural justice. And it is very important for us. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Nothing about us without us. Nothing about us without us. This next question is for everyone. How are you going to connect what's happening here to the communities to whom you are accountable to at home?
Let me first say, is this working? Let me first say that within the UNFCCC process, we have flawed carbon accounting rules under Article 6 that will adversely impact or cause even more harms to the global south, where the global north is actually financing energy transitions that are even more harmful than fossil fuels. But because of these flawed accounting rules, the emissions aren't being properly accounted. And I think that's a travesty, because we have allowed a system that will say on paper you're not counting these emissions properly. And so you can use your fancy tricks, your trickery math on paper, but you will never fool the atmosphere, because they are disrupting the atmosphere, and they're even more harmful than fossil fuels. And I think that we need when we talk about a just energy transition, it must be one that is carbon free. We must not transition to an energy source that is even more harmful than what we have now. And I see this happening. I see the environmental impacts in my community in the southeast U.S. that's being sacrificed for new energy economies in other countries. And they're being sacrificed with the environmental impacts of biomass manufacturing, and they're being shipped to countries who are being credited for reducing their emission when they are not actually reducing their emissions. They're just not counting the emissions.
Ashe. Yes, thank you. And thank you for what you're doing in your communities.
Thank you. I think one most important thing to do is to let the communities that we are representing here know that there was an opportunity to think about the effects and what they are going through at the moment, but the opportunity was taken away by not considering what ought to have been on the agenda. My concern is how I'm going to translate and let a woman whose daughter will not be in school next year because there was drought in East Africa, but because she could not feed the daughter, she opted to have the daughter get married, and for her to get married, then she has to go through harmful traditional practices, for those who know about female genital mutilation, as a rite of passage. Because she could not feed the daughter, she had to give away the daughter to a harmful practice so that she can be married, one, as a way of loading a mouth to feed, and two, as a way of ensuring that the family restores its dignity by receiving dowry. That's the community that I'm sitting here and representing. And for me, I'll let them know that the struggle continues. Their voice is important. It may be a voice at the community, but when we augment that voice beyond Kenya, beyond East Africa, beyond Africa, then we have other women of Afro descendants and those who are supporting us, the young people who are fighting this battle, that climate injustice is affecting that kind of woman back at home. That's the most important thing for me. And unless it's put on the table, unless it's well discussed, unless the people like me, like her, are on the table to participate, then I'm worried about the solutions. And that's what I'll take home. Thank you.
Thank you.
Comme parlementaire, notre rôle doit être déterminant maintenant. Au niveau du...
As parliamentarians, we need to play a very key role now.
Les slogans du Parlement panafricain, c'est une Afrique, une voix. One Africa, one voice.
The Pan-African Parliament slogan is One Africa, One Voice.
C'est la solidarité dans l'action et la résilience pour la justice climatique.
It is solidarity that is based on African resilience.
Nous venons de sortir d'un forum de parlementaires où nous avons montré que les parlementaires ont un rôle plus important à jouer parce que les négociations sur le climat étaient des négociations de l'exécutif. Il y avait moins d'implication des parlementaires.
We're just coming out from a forum where we've determined that the role of parliamentarians in climate negotiations is more important, more than ever before, because negotiations have so far been issues of the executive.
C'est pour nous maintenant le moment d'agir. Et d'agir comment, comme je l'ai dit tout à l'heure, c'est le moment d'agir par les contrôles du gouvernement pour qu'il respecte les engagements, parce qu'assez souvent on s'engage, on ne respecte pas les engagements.
It is therefore the opportune moment for us to act. And how do we act? By controlling government action and holding them accountable to the engagements that they've taken internationally, that they must see to it that they are applied nationally.
Dans toutes les discussions, vous entendrez que les technologies existent, l'argent est disponible, mais l'argent n'est pas accessible pour le pays le plus affecté d'Afrique.
In all of this, we notice that technology is available, finances are available, but they are not accessible to the countries that are most impacted by climate change.
Notre rôle sera de nous battre aux côtés de nos populations parce que nous représentons ces populations. Vous ne pouvez pas être parlementaire si la population ne vous donne pas ses voix. Nous devons porter les voix de la population.
Our role, therefore, is to continue to fight alongside our populations because we represent the population, and you cannot be a parliamentarian without having been given the mandate by the population. Hence, we are supposed to fight alongside our population and in their interests. Thank you.
Thank you. So we're down to about 5 minutes. And, you know, this conversation is so important. There is never enough time for us to come together and try to make things right. I want to put a plug that we have a global Afro Beat program every night here in Egypt at 8 p.m. The Chisholm Legacy Project is hosting, where we bring everyone from the Afro diaspora together. We make sure we're intentional that we have different voices. So if you want to watch us on live stream for that. And then we want to just kind of pose the question to everyone here. seated in this room, and for those around the world watching and listening, what can everyone do to support advancing racial justice in the UNFCCC and beyond? And there's so much that we can do and already are doing, but I want to offer signing this resolution and moving what's forth in this resolution. I want to offer as one step. I want to thank you all for joining and become a participant in the Global Afro-Descendant Climate Justice Collaborative. And I just want to say, what do we want? When do we want it? What do we want? When do we want it? Ashe. Thank you.